Using selection, we can tell our browser what text should look like when the user selects it. So like when you hover over and then you click and drag, like you can see that changes mine in VS Code a little bit. We can change that in the browser as well. So let's open this up in Chrome. Opening in Chrome. And we have lorem ipsum. Nothing major here. And when we select, it's just the default browser. So, honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you wanted to make it a little more interesting, especially if you have an article website like Medium, where I believe if you hover over it, changes the background color to green and the color to white. So let's actually go and do that exact example. So what we can do here is we can say, and this doesn't even need a particular element, we can just say, anytime you do any sort of selection, change that background color to green and change the color to white. And now when I save, we're going to see this is what it was before. Refresh. This is what it is now. And that is selection. I personally like that. I like that when I'm on a page and I want to copy some text, that I know exactly where I'm selecting this. It tells me that the front-end developer who made this website actually put the thought and time and effort into doing this. Let's take a look at transitions. Transitions let us smoothly make adjustments. So like, when you hover over an element and you move it up like 10 pixels, well, currently it looks a little janky. It's very abrupt. And instead with a transition, we can make it be smooth. So it smoothly moves up and we can tell it to listen for a certain type of change, such as like a width or a margin or position, any sort of thing. We can really transition a lot of things here. But in this example, we should transition a link. So let's make a link into a button. So let's do a button. And there's going to be nothing in it. And this is going to say, click me. And so let's target this link. And let's give it a background color of FFF. So it's going to be white. It's already going to look white, but let's give it white anyways. And we can transition that later. We can say display is inline block. And we can say padding on the top and bottom is going to be 5 pixels. And on the right and left is going to be 15 pixels. Let's also give this a color, an explicit color. And this is going to help with our transitions. So color is not actually going to be white, it's going to be black, 000. And let's just see what this looks like. Okay, no, not quite. Text decoration, none. And let's give it a border. Border is 1 pixel, solid black. And let's go ahead and make this bigger. Zoom, 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 zooming in. I'm at 500%. So this is the button. And when you hover over it, nothing happens. Let's add a hover. We can say a hover. And so when we hover over this, let's change like the background color to be black. Or we could do a hex color, 000. And let's change the color to be white, or FFF. Let's go ahead and save that. And okay, so we have a hover state. It's a little janky. Not really great for epileptics, to be honest. But we can make this a lot smoother by saying transition. And what do we want to transition here? We could transition everything, and we could say take 0.2 seconds to do it. So we say transition all as the first parameter. That's what we want it to transition. Second parameter is how long it should take. And when we refresh the page, you can see it fades in and fades out now. That's a lot better. Now we could actually make this significantly more accurate. And honestly, this is not super performant because your browser is now looking for every single change. It's going to look for like display, padding, color, text, decoration, border, and background color on the hover state. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe we only ever wanted to change the background color. We could say change that background color. Instead of all, we change it to background color. Matches this exact property name up here. And it's going to take 0.2 seconds. Now this is going to change that background color. It's going to fade. And we can, that's actually kind of hard to see. So let's do like 2.2 seconds. And you can see this background color when I refresh the page up here. This background color is going to take a little while to fade in, but that color is going to be instant. See that? Looks kind of cool, I guess, if you like that kind of effect. We could also say, comma, and I like to put this on another line, color. Let's change that transition length to something really long. Let's say like 5 seconds. And when I go up here, hit refresh, come on down, fading in and out. So nice and slow. Now, typically your transitions are not that slow. Typically your transitions are like 0.2 seconds, and this one could be 0.5 seconds. Let's go ahead and refresh. Something like that. And so that just makes it a little nicer. Now we can also change things like padding. But watch this. When I say hover, padding, let's change that padding from 5 pixels and 15 pixels. Let's change that to double. So top and bottom are going to be 10 pixels. Left and right are going to be 30 pixels. This is going to look a little janky. See that? We don't really want that. We want it to be nice and smooth. So what we can say here is comma, chameleon, padding, and we could say 0.4 seconds. Or because it's so much bigger, we could actually make this like 1 second. Like that. Now that's, again, not the nicest example ever, but it is a good example. And this is really good for like when you have a site, like let's go to rocketman.learnwagtail.com, and you can kind of see that this hover has a little bit of an effect there. Or if you were to hover over this, this is called a card. You could change the background color. You can make it fade in, fade out. You could make this move. You could do all sorts of stuff with a transition, so it doesn't look so janky. So that is a transition. What I would like you to do for this lesson is to create a link, make it a button, just like what I did, and then change the background color when you hover. You don't need to do all the other ones, but just change the background color when you hover and make sure you add that transition to your main element, not your pseudo selector, not your pseudo class, your main element. Okay, let's talk about gradients. There are 2 primary types of gradients. There's linear and radial. A linear gradient goes from side to side, and a radial gradient sort of emerges from the center. Now we're only going to work with linear because it looks a lot better, and honestly I don't think I've ever seen a case where a radial gradient actually looks good. But if you wanted to learn a little bit beyond what I'm going to teach you in the scope of this course, you can look up radial gradients. We're probably going to see an example of it anyways. But we're going to be working with linear gradients just because, you know, for the most part they look better. At least during this decade in web design, it looks good. Maybe old styles will come back and it'll look good to have radial sort of gradients, but linear is where it's at these days. So let's go ahead and add a box. Let's do box. And in this box, we're going to have some sort of gradient. So let's not call it box, let's call it gradient. And in our CSS, we can do .gradient, select that element, and we could say the background image is going to be a linear gradient, and this is going to take a direction. So a direction, color 1, color 2. And so this actually isn't going to do anything, but I'm going to leave this here just for a second. Just leave that on the screen, and let's do a height of 500 pixels, and we don't need to set a width because it's a block element, but you know, for good measures, let's do width 100%. And so this linear gradient here, what is that direction going to be? Let's say the direction is going to be to right. So it's going to go from left to right. It's going to start off with the color of black, and then it's going to go into yellow. And so let's go ahead and load up this page in Google Chrome. And now we have this nice little gradient. Now what's cool about this is going from left to right, but we don't need to tell it left to right. We can give it an angle. We can say something like 45 DEG for degrees. And that changes it. That changes it from black in this corner to yellow in this corner. Instead of left to right, it's from corner to corner. Now I'm going to be honest here, most people actually don't memorize this. This is a real keener thing. People don't use gradients enough to always be memorable, and it's also sort of hard to figure out exactly what kind of angle you want. So usually we use some sort of CSS gradient tool. And so what I'm going to do is just hop on over to Google, and I'm going to type in CSS gradient generator. And so there's cssgradient.io, Colorzilla. This is a popular one. This one has been popular for a number of years now. But I'm going to just select that first one because I have in other courses given this one enough attention. Let's go with cssgradient.io. And so the idea here is you have a gradient, and we can do Oh, we can do radial here. So let's go ahead, grab this. And I just dragged that down and that got rid of it. And so let's do radial. And this is what radial looks like. It starts from the inside and goes to the outside. So there is a case where it looks okay. In this case, it looks all right. Now, what we were doing was over here, this color was black. And then this color over here, we just select that one, is white. And so that's radial. That's linear. We can change the angle and stuff by going down here, changing this angle like that. There's no angle when it comes to radial though. And now the nice thing about this is typically these will give you exactly the CSS you're looking for. And so this is actually really nice. This is telling us this is a radial gradient. It's a circle. Linear is going to be 0 degrees. Let's go ahead and change that to like 68 degrees. RGB 000, that's black. RGBA, that has the alpha in here, that's a 1, so it's completely visible. And 0%, and then again RGBA 2525, 255, 255, 255, that's white. 100% transparency, or maybe that's the wrong wording. Either way, you can completely see it, and it's going to go to 100%. So it starts at 0 and goes to 100. And we can change that. That's what that 0 and 100% means. You can see that that number is changing there. And what this looks like is we can make this nice and tight if we wanted to. Something like that. And then you could have text on the left. You could have an image on the right if you wanted to make this one see-through. Just like that. You can have an image, a background image, just like that. So most of us don't actually remember all of this just because we use it so infrequently. They are nice to have, but usually we just use some sort of tool that's going to help us. Now, what's really nice is we can do this, go in here, click right in the middle, and let's make this green. And we can do all sorts of stuff with this. And we don't have to figure it out through code. There are tools that help us do that. I would suggest using a tool for something like this. What I would like you to do is go ahead and Google CSS gradient generator. Use this tool, use another tool. It doesn't really matter. They all sort of do the same thing. And just experiment and then look at the code that it gives you, copy that code, and then put it into your page. You can change the entire gradient background of like your body element. Don't forget to give it a height of 100% if you select the body element, or a class or a div element like what I did, and I selected the gradient and then I just applied it to there. So just go ahead and give that a shot. It's really, really fun. It adds a nice little spice to your website as well. Tagging along from that last lesson, we can create a background image so it appears darker without actually having to do very much work. Now, there are a couple different ways to achieve this. One is using a filter, which we haven't learned yet, or another is using a gradient to layer on top. And in this lesson, we're going to use the gradient on top, just because sometimes you want a gradient on top. You're going to see this all over the place. Once you see this, you can see it like all over Facebook. You can see it all over Twitter. There's gradients everywhere, and they're nice and elegant as well. So first things first, let's go ahead and select the body element. And I'm going to give this, no, not just body. I'm going to select the body and the HTML elements. I'm going to give this a height of 100%. And let's get rid of the margin and the padding. And then I want to select just the body element. And in here, what I can do is I can say the background image is going to be a linear gradient. Let's give this like 180 degrees. And let's say this is going to go from black to black, but different opacity. So RGBA 0, 0, 0, and then the alpha is going to be 0. And that's going to start at 0%. And then it's going to go to RGBA 0, 0, 0. That's black again. And that's going to go to, well, we could say 0. So that's actually not going to do anything. That's not going to gradient at all. But we can say 0.6 to begin with, 60% see-through black, and then 2. And this is just so hard to read. Let's go ahead and put this on new lines, something like this. There we go. And this is actually sort of getting into programming because that's what these parentheses means. It means this is a function. We'll talk about that in JavaScript. Once we're done with CSS, we'll learn more about that in JavaScript. But What we're saying here is we've got a linear gradient, 180 degrees, start with black, it's 60% see-through, go to 80%, and it's going to end at 100% down the road. So let's just see what this looks like in Google Chrome. Okay, so that's a nice little gradient. Let's go ahead and actually make this a little more. Yeah, there we go. So it's lighter on the top, darker on the bottom. Now, if we wanted to add an image to this, we absolutely could. But first, we need an image. So let's go to unsplash.com and let's take a look at this image. Rocket, this one. And I'm going to right click and copy image address. And I'm going to hot link straight to this, to that image. And what we can do here is comma, and let's maybe actually put this back on its original line there. And I like making these line up so it looks nice. And then we could say URL, like a regular background image. Paste that URL in there. Semicolon, and let's go ahead and take a look at this. That looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and delete this linear gradient. Let's just cut that out for a sec. This is what the image looks like normally with that linear gradient on top of it. This is what it looks like now. Now, the nice thing about this is we can add some text. But before we do that, let's go ahead and add color is going to be white. Font size is going to be something huge, like 90 pixels. And text align is going to be center. And so in our body, we can now say, this is a rocket. Save. This is a rocket. And so this text is a little more visible versus this. If I go ahead and just delete that, you know, it's not bad. We can still see it. Let's even do this. Let's do padding top 200 pixels. No, let's go further. Let's go 500 pixels. So we can't even see all of that now. That's just the nature of this image. We can't necessarily change the image all the time, but what we can do is we can throw that linear gradient back in here. And now we can read it perfectly fine. Now, a case in point is if you took the CSS 101 class, if you go to rocketman.learnwagtail.com, that's exactly what's going on here. It's even the exact same image. Now, I would like you to give that a shot. Don't forget, you have access to this file. Also, you can ask questions in the Learning to Code Facebook group if you ever have questions or you're curious about something or you just want to get feedback. We can load custom web fonts into our site. So the way fonts work is it will try to access the font on your computer. And we've seen this sort of before in CSS 101, where it's like font family, and then it has like the first font and then like some sort of fallback that most people have, like Arial. And then it's going to say something like a serif font. And so it's going to try this one. If it doesn't exist, it's going to try this one. And if it doesn't exist, it's going to let your computer choose. But let's say this one doesn't exist. How do we make it exist? Now, a nice thing we can do is basically import it from somewhere else. So we can go to fonts.google.com and let's go ahead and just grab a cool looking font that we can find, something that really sticks out that's going to be a little bit different. None of these are pretty wild. There's that one. No. Let's do this one. Pacifico. And so I just click that, select this style, and I can add different font variations if I wanted to. I'm not going to. I'm just going to click embed up here. And we can import either directly through our CSS, which is pretty cool, or through our HTML. I'm going to do the HTML way. So take all of that, copy. I apologize, that's small to see, but if you follow along, it'll be easier on your computer to see it. And then above our style, just paste that in there. Now, we don't know what this name is yet. We think it's Pacifico, but it could be lowercase, uppercase, could have a different name. We never know. So what we do is go back here, and it says CSS rules to apply font families. Font family, Pacifico, or cursive. Let's go ahead and change that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment that out, and we're going to see some lorem ipsum in here. Lorem ipsum. And let's go ahead and change that font size again to something bigger, something like 45 pixels. And this is what we see. This is our standard font. If I uncomment Pacifico, it changes it. Now, here's the thing is if I don't add this line in here, if I just cut that out of my code, it goes to cursive. This is what my computer uses when it's told to use cursive. So it's saying, hey, Caleb's computer, use Pacifico, but if it doesn't have Pacifico, use cursive. Well, Pacifico doesn't exist. And so we said, make it exist. This HTML element is going to say, hey, go in here, download this file called Pacifico. In that file, we know it's called Pacifico, so we can now have access to it and use it. Boom, just like that. What I would like you to do is give this a shot. Go to fonts.google.com, pick a font that's free. They do have some on here that are paid. Do not pay for a font at this point, please. Just find a free font like Roboto. Roboto is a good one. You can choose all different styles if you want. These are different font weights as well. So we could say like, select that, select that, select that, select that. And we can use these different font families in here. Go ahead, give that a shot. Try using a custom font. Okay, let's talk about transformations. A transformation is a way that we can rotate, skew, scale, or move an element away from its natural spot. Now, in this example, I just have a regular box on my page. And when I just open this up, it's a regular box. In fact, let's add a margin to this. Let's do margin 50 pixels and auto, and that's going to center align that for me. Now, let's go ahead and go through some of these transformations. Now, transformations aren't hard. We can mix and match them if we wanted to, but let's just go one at a time. So let's first start with translate. This one is interesting. Translate, I think, personally, is not the proper name. The property is called transform, and the key, or the full declaration is going to be transform translate, and then it takes parentheses. And we can move this on the x-axis and y-axis. So we can say move this on the x-axis 100 pixels, comma, on the y-axis 100 pixels. And when we go back to our page, refresh, we can see it actually moved. So that's what translate does. It just moves it. It translates where it naturally sits on the page. We've done this with position relative, position absolute, position fixed, position sticky. We've done all sorts of movements like that. We can also use margin on the top and the left to sort of push the element around, but translate is another way to do this, which is really, really nice. Let's take a look at the next one. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to comment this using proper CSS. We could also do rotate. Let's see what rotate does. So we want to do transform, rotate. Let's do 45 degrees, DEF for degrees. And that just rotates it for us. And we could do any sort of degrees we want. We could do like, rotate it 68 degrees. Or 91 degrees, which is sort of the same as like rotating it 1 degree. Or 10 degrees. We can rotate this as much as we want. If you do rotate it perfectly 90, it's going to look like nothing happened just because this is a square. So that's 90 degrees. Okay, let's take a look at animations. Animations let us move things in a smooth and controlled way. It's a lot like a transition, but we don't necessarily need some sort of event to trigger it. Like, when you hover over a link and that transition sort of changes? Well, that's because you hovered your mouse over it. But what if we just wanted something to move on the page without some sort of trigger? We can do that with an animation. And the nice thing about that is we can tell the animation to start right away, we can give it some sort of delay, we can do all sorts of stuff with animations. For example, we could make things wiggle, we can make things rotate, we can make things jump out or bounce if we wanted to, or really anything that we can do with CSS, we can animate. So what I'm going to do here is I have a box, and let's go ahead and just show this box, and let's do border radius 50%, and this is going to be a box, but it's also going to be a circle. It's going to display as a circle. So here we go. I've got this circle. Nothing fancy. It's completely static. So first things first, when we're creating an animation, we need to give it an animation name. So let's go ahead and create a new animation. We use the @ symbol, keyframes, and then a name. So I'm going to call this slide me. And it's going to take a from, and it's going to take a to. Now I want to make sure that this is movable. So let's say this position of this element is going to be absolute. It's going to be at the top of my page and the top left of my page. And when I refresh the page, it just hugs that top wall here and that left wall there. So what I can now say is from top is equal to 0, and let's say left is equal to 0. And where I want it to go is left is 100%. So let's just move it left all the way across the page. And when I refresh this page, nothing's going to happen because we created an animation, but we didn't set the animation to be applicable to our element. So what we do in our element is we say animation name is equal to slide me. And this is case sensitive. So I've got a capital M in there. Make sure you have a capital M in yours if you're using a capital M. So it has to be the exact same. When we save this and refresh, we actually saw that it doesn't work. Let's go ahead and give this an animation duration. It doesn't know how long to slide for. Let's say it's going to slide for 4 seconds. Now let's go back. And as soon as we give it a duration, it's going to move all the way across the page and then off of it. And then it starts over. Now, if we wanted it to do this forever, we could say animation iteration count. Iteration count. Nailed it. And we would say infinite. And it's going to go to the end and start again. And start again. Just like that. Now, if we wanted it to move to the left and then come back, we could give it an animation direction. Animation direction. And we could say alternate. And so, hold on, I'll refresh this. And it'll go to the left, and then it's going to slide, or it went all the way left, and then it's going to slide back left, and then it's going to move back right, and then slide left. Now that is a simple animation. We can make these significantly more complicated if we wanted to. We could, let's just comment this out entirely, and let's create a new animation. So I commented that out, and it's like it doesn't even exist. So we can do keyframes, slide me, so this is going to be the exact same name as this one here. Just happens to be that this one's commented out. And then we could say something like at 0%, do something. Then at 50%, do something else. And then at 100%, nope, not there. Then at 100%, do something else. So at 0%, what do we want this to do? We want this to be at the top 0, left 0. At 50%, let's change the background color to blue, and let's actually set the background color to black by default. Background color is equal to black. And then at 100%, let's change that background color again. Background color is equal to yellow. And let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Oh, actually, we need 100% to be left 100%. And so what this is going to do is say at 0%, this is where the CSS should be applied. This kind of CSS should be applied at 0%. At 50% of whatever that animation is, that animation duration is 4 seconds. So at 50% or 2 seconds, change that background color to blue. It should be completely blue at that point, and it's going to try to be nice and smooth. And then at 100%, at 4 seconds, that background color is going to be fully yellow, and the position is going to be left 100%. Let's go ahead and give this a shot, and let's see what this looks like. Just like that, and then goes from yellow to blue to black. Now, what I would like you to do is I want you to create an animation that does something like this. However, I want you to make a box or a circle or something. You can even animate an image if you wanted to, just like a little div with an image in it. I want you to make yours go from the top left to the top right to the bottom right to the bottom left, and then back up to the top left. So I want yours to go all the way around the frame of your page. Don't forget, you're going to need to use position absolute for this. Position absolute. You're going to want to set the initial state on your element before you get into the keyframes. So this says top is 0, left is 0. Even though I'm redeclaring it here, that is a-okay. It's nice and explicit. And then you want to give it an animation name that needs to match your keyframes name down here. Give it a duration, otherwise it's not going to work. And then for your task for this, you're going to be using 4 percentages. So 0, 25%, 50%, and 70%, or 75% rather. And then maybe, possibly 100%. I'm going to leave that up to you. See how that works out for you. Go ahead, give that a shot. If you get stuck, don't forget you can ask questions in the Learning to Code Facebook group. We're here to help. Okay, let's talk about table layouts. Or not table layouts, but page layouts. So up until this point, you've probably been using display inline block. You've probably been using tables or floating to move your elements across your page, but there is a better way. There's 2 better ways to do this actually. And the first one is Flexbox. So I'm going to teach you Flexbox. It's important that you get familiar with Flexbox. I'm going to teach you the basis of Flexbox, and then I want you to go and maybe explore Flexbox a little bit further. Now, the thing with Flex and what we're going to be learning after, Grid, is these are very big CSS modules, and you do not need to know all of it. You don't need to memorize all of it. Honestly, you need to remember sort of like how certain things work. But then you just need to be able to Google your answers later. Because honestly, I've been writing CSS for a long time, and I still don't remember every single way to apply Flexbox off the top of my head. And that's just the nature of the beast. There's a lot to learn in CSS, and there's no possible way you can learn all of it and remember all of it. You just need to be able to remember how to get your answers. And again, that's about 50% of web development these days, is knowing how to find your answers. So let's talk about Flexbox. Flexbox is a layout module that makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structures without using float or positions or tables and things like that. So let's go ahead and create a div, and I'm going to call this I'm going to call this a container. And in here, let's say I have 2 elements and I want them side by side. So I've got a div here, I'm going to call this left, and I've got a div here, I'm going to call this right. And when I boot this up in my page, and this is just from the last lesson there, it says left and right. Now, what if we want them actually to be left and right? Well, we can float them, we can position them, we can do all sorts of things, but there's a better way, and that's Flexbox. So the nice thing about this is it's quite simple to get started, and it can get really, really hairy down the line because there's a lot to learn, but to get started is really easy. So let's go ahead and select our container, and we're going to say display, this is a new display type, is Flex. Let's save that, refresh our page, and now it's left and right. Now let's go ahead and select those containers, container elements, or container items, and let's give this a border, 1 pixel, solid red. Cool. Okay, so we have something that sits side by side. Let's go ahead and make each of these items be, let's say, 50%. So we say flex basis, and we want this to be 50%. Now this is flexible, so we don't use the word width because width is implying a hard-coded value. This flex basis is going to say start at 50%, but you know what? If the right column takes up more space than the left column is allowed to shrink. Or vice versa, the right column is allowed to shrink, or the right column is allowed to grow. So what we can do here is we can say class is equal to right, and then we can say, you know, if there's, let's get fancy with our selectors here, container div.right, we can say that this flex basis needs to be 75%. Let's go ahead and refresh our page, and we see that it now takes up 75%, and that left was actually shrunken down a little bit. And we can do a really drastic example here of saying like 95%. And it's shrinking as much as it possibly can here. Now we can say that, hey, by the way, these are not allowed to shrink, these are not allowed to grow either. So we can say flex shrink is equal to 0, and flex grow is also 0. And what this is going to say is this flex basis, this left column, will always be at least 50%. Now what you don't see is I can scroll over here, is that right is 90% of the viewport width. It just happens to be going onto the part of the page that we can't see by default. Now I'm going to get rid of that right in there, just because I think that's going to make this a little too complicated, but that was a fun little example. And now we can't scroll left and right, and we have 50% here and 50% there. Now what happens if we wanted to add another container? Or another item. We could say this one should be center. So we've got left, center, and then way over here we have right. And again, this is taking up 50% of my viewport, 50% of my viewport, and then right is taking up 50% of my viewport for a total width of 150%. And this can get really, really frustrating. there's a way around this. On our container, we can say flex wrap the page. So what this is going to do is say, this is 50%, this is 50%. But if anything goes over 100%, just bump it down onto a new line. And these actually do go onto their own lines because this is 50% plus 1 pixel on either side. Let's go ahead and change everything on our page to box sizing border box, so that our boxes also include the width of the border, and boom, we're working with layouts now. Now we can just keep adding elements too. We can just keep adding them and they'll just keep stacking the way we want them to stack, just like this. Now we can change at flex basis. Let's change at flex basis to something like 20%. And now we have 10 cells, all sort of side by side, nice and tight together, and they are flexible. Meaning we no longer need to use tables. We no longer need to use floating or position absolute with relative and things like that. We can use flexbox to put things side by side. Now, this is not the greatest example. A better example is going to be if we do this. Let's create in our container div, and this is going to be called navigation. So let's give this a class of navigation. And we're going to create another one called content. Content in here. And so what I can say is, let's keep the box sizing. Let's keep our container to be display flex and flex wrap, so it wraps onto a new line if we want it to. Let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff in here, except the border. And we're going to effectively restart. Okay, so we don't have a flex basis or a flex box. Width is a way you can think of it. We need to set that width now. Now, we don't want to necessarily set the flex basis on both of these. This is selecting the container and both divs. We want to select it on the navigation and content. So let's go ahead and type navigation. Let's give this a flex basis of 20%. And is it allowed to grow? Flex grow. Nope. Is it allowed to shrink though? Flex shrink. Yeah, we're going to say it's allowed to shrink if it needs to. Okay, so that's 20% of my viewport width. That's this entire white section that we're looking at here. And for content, let's do .content flex basis is equal to 80%, the remainder of 100% minus 20%. And let's do the same thing here where we say flex grow and shrink. But the content is more important. So is it allowed to grow? Yeah. Is it allowed to shrink? Let's say no. Now we have some content in there. And we can get rid of all that in there. And we can do all sorts of stuff. We can say H1, hello world, paragraph with a lorem. We could do another H2, another heading. Hello world again. We could do another paragraph with some lorem in there. And boom, we have navigation. We have content. We have a page layout. We can even, if we wanted to, put a header in here. We can do dot header. And let's go ahead and style our dot header. Let's say dot header. Flex basis is 100%. Can it grow? No, we don't want it to be more than 100%. Can it shrink? Flex shrink. No, it needs to be 100% all the time. Let's say the header needs to have a background color of FFF. Nope. Let's do CCC. Let's say the color needs to be 555. Border bottom, 2 pixels, solid black. Okay, that almost worked. We just need some actual content in there. So header. Look at that. Okay, that looks kind of terrible. I can't live with that in good consciousness. So let's do background color is equal to F5, F5, F5. Color is going to be black. Padding is going to be 20 pixels. There we go. And if we go ahead and get rid of that border, and because it's the only thing in there, we can get rid of all of it, but let's just comment that out so you can access this code later if you wanted to. We have some sort of table layout, or not a table layout, but in CSS 101, we did this with a table. In CSS 201, please don't use tables anymore. We don't need tables for layouts. We can now use Flex. And this is the way you should be creating page layouts in the future. Flex or grid. We'll talk about grid in the next lesson. Now, what I would like you to do is spend probably 20 minutes, maybe even more. You're going to want to set display flex on a parent element. So we have our parent element. All the child elements will be flex items. That's what they're called, flex items. So we've got navigation, content, and header item. And then I want you to set the flex basis of them. See if you can get flex wrap to work. Flex grow and shrink. Mess around with that. See if you can get that to work for you or not work for you, and get a feel for how it's supposed to work. And I want you to, before moving on to grid, create something that looks a little bit like this. Now, it doesn't need to look beautiful. We're focusing on the layout here, where we have a left column here. We have a right column here, and we have a row on the top called header. Go ahead and give that a shot. Remember, if you get stuck, ask questions down below. Ask questions in the Learning to Code Facebook group. There are a lot of us who know a lot about Flexbox. We can help you at a moment's glance. Grid is an even better way to create a page layout. It's more advanced than Flexbox, and it's specifically designed to be good at making page layouts. So while Flexbox has its purpose, like being able to vertically align things, which is nice, we didn't cover that. That's something you might want to go and Google on your own time, though, as a little extra homework. Grid is not designed to do that. Grid is literally for a template layout. So when it comes to grid, there are a few things we need to know. There are columns, rows, and gutters. And these gutters, we call them gaps. In frameworks like Bootstrap, you're going to see them called gutter. We don't call them gutters technically. In CSS, they're called gaps. So we've got columns, rows, and gaps between the columns and rows. And like an HTML table, we can make each cell span one or more columns or rows. So let's dive into this. So let's go ahead and create our first grid. Let's create an ID in here, and I got to change that from Django template back to HTML. Let's go ahead and create a container element called grid, and it has an ID of grid. And let's give this an item, and let's just call this 1, and I just made 9 items in here. Now, if we refresh our page, we're going to see 1 through 9 on their own lines. This is completely expected because currently this is not using a grid. This is using basic default display block, and these are all divs. So what we can do here is we can select our grid. We can say grid, display, and a new display type here. We can say grid. And this is just going to turn it into a grid. So if we take a look now, nothing happens. We need to say this has a grid template columns. And how many columns do we want? Well, we have 9 sections, so let's do 3 by 3. So let's do auto, auto, auto. So these are columns. This is going to be column 1, 2, and 3. Let's go ahead and see what this does. Okay, we're getting somewhere. They're all side by side. That's really nice. Let's go ahead and select every item in here. Let's do item, and let's give this a border 1 pixel solid red. And this just allows us to see what we're working with here. Now, let's say we want to create some sort of gaps between these. We can do this with a grid column gap or grid row gap. A grid column gap is going to look like this. So grid column gap, and that's going to be, let's say, 20 pixels. And so it creates a little gap between our columns. Or we could do grid row gap, and that creates spacing between our rows. And we can actually have both at the same time. So column gap and row gap of 20 pixels. And now we have a nice looking grid here. But this is not that great for page templates. Page templates usually have some sort of header, some sort of navigation, some sort of footer. So let's go ahead and create that. Let's create item 1. Let's make it span through 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll get rid of 2 and 3. And this is a lot like working with a table, but it's using CSS. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy all those. Copy, paste, and just give these item names in here. So these are all going to share the styling of 1 pixel solid red border. But let's select item 1, and we can say the grid column is going to start at item number 1 and is going to end grid column end at item number 3. And so what we're saying here is start at column 1, right over here, 2, 3, and it's going to take over all of this. And I actually did that wrong. It should be, starts at 1 here, 2 there, 3 there, and then 4 there. Let's change that to 4. And item 1 is now going to be a header. And it dislodged number 2 and 3. So if we wanted to, we could get rid of those if we wanted to. We don't need to. Let's go ahead and actually get rid of 2 and 3. So item 2 and 3. There we go. Now let's merge 6 and 9 together. And we can do that with grid row start and grid row end. And we want to work with item 6 here. So let's do item 6, grid row start. Where is this going to start? 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say this starts at 2. And let's do grid row end and 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do 4. And occasionally I actually get these mixed up. Yeah, there we go. Did that right. And so now we dislodged the ones that were just after it. So let's go ahead and try to touch this up. Now, sometimes when you're learning this, it's a little bit of a guesswork, but we now have row 6. Right, so we've got 1, 4, 5, and 6. Let's go ahead and get rid of, I don't know, let's just get rid of 9. Let's get rid of 9. Okay, that's nice. Let's go ahead and merge 4 and 5 together. So we want item 4 and 5 together. So let's do item 4. And we're merging columns together. So we want to do grid column start. And this is 1 over here, 2 over here, 3, 4. So we want 2 to 4. And we can do this. Okay, that works. Now let's do the same with 5 and 7 because let's see what happens when we do 5 and 7. We can do the same thing, item 5, and this is just applying the same sort of styling. And now we can see that this is all dislodged. It's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and merge 7 and 8 together. And let's get rid of 8. And so we want 7 to look like item number 1 up here. And we can actually start to reuse things because item 1 and item 7 are going to have the exact same layout in the sense that I want item 7 here to take up this whole width. And item 1 is going to take up the whole width. So we might as well reuse this styling. Now, we have something to work with here. We have a header up here. We have a footer down here. We have perfect spacing. We have a navigation section or maybe an advertisement section. We've got some content for the top content, maybe like a summary section, and the content of the page. And so that's how you make a page layout using grid. And so grid gets vastly more complex than this as well, but this is a really, really good start to learning how to use grid. Now, when you're creating a page in the future, try to use grid as your page layout module. You can use Flexbox. You can technically use tables and floats, display inline, block. You can do all sorts of stuff, but try to use grid from now on. Or if you don't want to use grid, you can always use Flexbox. Both are completely acceptable from here on out. But what I would like you to do is I want you to try and create a layout like this. Now, what I want you to do is make your brain sweat. Don't reference my code, although you have access to it. Don't reference my code. I want you to try and remember how to do this. And if you don't remember, I want you to go and get some practice Googling how to do this. Remember, just the terms are what you need to know. Go ahead, give that a shot. If you get really stuck or you want to join a community, you can always join the Learning to Code Facebook group. We're here to help. Your final project is going to be find a really nice website design and replicate it as much as you possibly can. You're going to run into a plethora of hurdles. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be really good practice. I would say just do the best that you possibly can and just have some fun with it. If you can't make it perfect, that's totally fine. So what I would like you to do, open up your favorite browser, go to Pinterest.com, and just type in web design or web design inspiration, web design layout, anything like that. Let's do web design inspiration. And create a nice looking site. You know all the pieces, and don't forget to break things down into smaller components. Don't try to look at a page and be like, oh, I don't know how to do all that. Break it down into small components. So a good one would be like this one. And this is a Squarespace website template apparently. But what you can do is you now know how to make this navigation up here. You know how to make things center. You know how to select the center element for your logo. You know how to make a hero. You know about padding and margin. So you have this section covered already. Down here, we have like a little card. You have that section covered already. So just style. It doesn't need to be functional. It doesn't need to be an actual carousel and slide and everything. But you do want to make sure that it does have like a background color, that the layout's nice. You can try adding in arrows and things like that. This section here would also use a grid. This is a really good candidate for grid. And then you just use background images. So you can go ahead and get started with something like that. If you don't want to do that particular site, that's totally okay. You don't need to find that one either. You can go and, if you're feeling really spicy, you can try to do something like this with all the angles. You can use transform to skew things, to rotate things, to use like this section here would actually be a square. And then it would just be rotated a little bit, and so that it meets right in the middle. Yeah, give that a shot. Don't forget to break things down. Like this could be Flexbox. This would be Flexbox, not necessarily grid, but Flexbox. And this one would just have a margin top of an extra like 50 pixels. So what I would like you to do is go ahead and give this a shot and just try to break it down piece by piece. Don't try to tackle all of it all at once. Maybe tonight you try to do like the navigation, and tomorrow you try to do the hero section, and the next day you try to do the next section. Take your time with it, have some fun with it, and really try to get into the nitty-gritty of CSS. Everything you've learned in this course is applicable to these style of designs. These designs are pretty wild, actually. And to be totally honest, this is a very, very advanced design. So maybe, if you're not feeling comfortable, don't start with that one. But you can start with something like this. This is a really good one. It has your navigation, it has a header, it's got a button in there. It's got different font sizes, different font types. You've got different styles in here. So this could be Flexbox as well, or floating, or position relative, or position absolute. You can try anything like that. I would say try one of these. If you want to start with something easier, I would say go to rocketman.learnwagtail.com and just try to recreate this site. Just this page, not all of it, not all the pages on here, just this page. So you've got navigation in here. It's nice and simple. You've got background image with a gradient on top. You've got a button. You've got different text. You've got different fonts, so custom web fonts. In here we have Flexbox. We have two cards side by side. In here, we would have two cards side by side, but this one's using position relative and position absolute to sort of bump it over just a little bit so it's layered on top using a Z index. Same thing with this, just the opposite way. Instead of moving left, this section is moving right. And in here, we could use grid or Flexbox. I would suggest Flexbox for this one. And then you could use grid down here. Go ahead and give that a shot. I know it's a lot to take in, but honestly, and I cannot stress this enough, start small. Start with just a navigation, start with just the header. Take your time on it, Google a lot, ask a lot of questions. I'm here for you. The Learning to Code Facebook community, they're all here for you. Go ahead and give this a shot, and feel free to share your progress along the way.